Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Check out our archive and programme stream at windowsontheworld.net.
Welcome to Windows on the World. Now, we're going to recap on what we've been doing over the last year. We've had some great successes and also some not so minor frustrations, and also some brilliant shows with the help of our producer, Tony Hurst. We're now reaching a much wider audience, and we've had some great guests on. But more importantly, it's given me a chance to actually put information out in a much greater in much greater detail, really, by doing the radio shows and being able to interact with people. As you know, previously we were doing videos and putting them on YouTube and basically just doing reports. And I'm going to be doing more of that in the new year, and also working on some really interesting documentaries. Now, over the past 12 months, we've had many different types of shows as well, which has been great. I've covered a lot of things from climate change, even to cloud busting and crime farming. We've done quite a lot on crime farming, and crime farming has been in the news recently. Of course, with this rape trial completely collapsing by the police withholding defence evidence, we've talked about this in great detail, and it's all starting to tie up into a much bigger picture. And it all comes after this report by the Crown Prosecution Service Inspectorate and Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary, that in 55.5% of examined cases, essential defence evidence was being withheld. Now, this ties into a really big picture, and it ties into Crime Stoppers, and we're doing more investigation into Crime Stoppers. As you may know, we got the whole of Kent Crime Stoppers Most Wanted gallery removed because of a case that I became involved in. A young lady was accused of a very serious assault. This never happened. I was the only defence witness. All my evidence was buried. I was assaulted by the police. I was kicked out of the police station. I wasn't allowed to give evidence. So this wasn't just withholding evidence. This was preventing defence evidence and also destroying it, because when the two clowns in uniform who attended my property, I won't call them police, I'll call them PC's Wood and Chase from Kent Crime Farming Constabulary, they turned up, and I asked them to come into the house because there'd been an allegation of an assault. And I said, come in, I'll tell you what happened. One of them started pushing me in the chest. The other one twisted my arm. At this point, the young lady who'd been accused of an assault was actually filming them on her tablet and said, don't do that, guys, that's not cool. And at this point, they turned around to her and said, right, you're nicked, and dragged her off. And it's taken 2 years to get her custody records. In other words, the interview which she did at Medway Police Station. Now, this interview was actually done the next night, and she had none of her essential medication. Her medication was denied her in the interview. And guess what? Well, the interview transcript, which was given to the court, does not tally with what's on the DVD, as we thought in the first place. In other words, the whole thing has been manufactured, and to a degree that's been so shocking to me. I didn't think it was possible that the police could actually do this in this country. I thought there would be some remedy at some point. There's no remedy at any point. And this comes on the back of all these other things that we've been investigating over the years, from the administrative courts, where basically they're held in private and people's property is stolen from them in the county court. It's a massive picture. And anybody out there who thinks there's any form of justice left in this country has certainly not been in contact with the police or the judicial system. It's absolutely on a scale which I would not have thought possible. Now, when we did our show on Richie Allen about the crime farming in Kent, about this case, and there are several shows on this, I would like people to share them. They're not getting enough views. We've had the one about Crime Stoppers up for quite some time, and this is a big deal because I wrote to Lord Ashcroft because this lady got put on Crime Stoppers and it completely prejudiced her trial, and also she should never have been put on there. Her lawyer couldn't even get her off. Then we find out that she's been libelled by newspapers who carry the pictures from Crime Stoppers. And this is going on all over the country. I reported this to Lord Ashcroft, and I wrote a very concise but strongly worded email to him in his own personal email. And of course, Lord Ashcroft is chair of trustees of Crime Stoppers. And he acted accordingly. Well, it did something that the police refused to do and Crime Stoppers were incapable of doing, which is taking her off the Most Wanted Crime Stoppers website because she wasn't wanted. The point was that her trial had not begun. The whole thing was that she'd been charged and she'd just been requested in court, but she didn't actually have to be in court. The judge then issued an arrest warrant and she was put on Most Wanted for a no bail warrant. Now, if you look on Most Wanted, look on the National Crime Stoppers Most Wanted, you will see something very interesting. The national database, if you've ever looked at it, has been reduced. There's 13 pages now on the national database. There were previously at least 48. Now on the Kent Crime Stoppers, which is the region of Kent on Most Wanted, those have been taken off and there's now one page with 7 people on. Previously there were well over 250 people on, so we've had some effect there, and I'm really proud of what we've done. I'm proud of what the show's achieving because it means that we are having an effect, but we need the public to get involved. Now I want to bring private prosecution. I want to bring a class action actually against Kent Police for what they've done, and I want more people who've been put on Crime Stoppers to come forward because in my view Crime Stoppers is not fit for purpose. It shouldn't be up there. It's an absolute joke in many respects because a lot of the people on there are not really wanted. In fact, let's before we start this, it's very interesting to actually look at what people are actually wanted for, because on the main Crime Stoppers website now there's somebody who's wanted for some assets. Basically he's been accused of a crime and the police have asset stripped him to the tune of £50,000, but the court says that he owes 122,000. So what the police are asking the public to do, and Crime Stoppers are asking the public to do, is to snoop on this guy and tell the police if he's got any other property or money that they can steal off him. Well, I'll use the word steal because we've got no evidence that he actually owes the money. It was just a decision that the court made. So that's not in itself evidence that he owed anything. Now, what we've got to remember is that the court are asset stripping people on a vast scale in this country, which takes us into the county court. Now, years ago, we got involved in cases with a child support agency. Now, the child support agency has been basically disbanded. I think it's now called CMEC. And then the child maintenance, it's like a separate company. And all that now seems to be in the background, but they still are trying to asset strip people for money that they don't owe. And of course, there were many, many suicides. People were getting lumbered with these kind of estimated bills, basically, for like £50,000, £100,000 or whatever. And you had to prove that you didn't owe it. But the other thing about this is that in court, under the Farley ruling, it means that the magistrate or judge cannot actually question the order. So once an order is made, then the order has to be upheld by the court. So that's how the asset stripping starts. We've seen this going into bankruptcy now because we have these smart insolvency companies who asset strip you. So in other words, if you get a bankruptcy petition issued against you, then what they will do is the government will sell the debt to a private asset stripping company, which is what they are. Basically, they become your trustee in bankruptcy, but really what they've done is bought a debt, and then they just asset strip you for everything you've got, and they just make up these fees and stick them on. If there's any lawyers out there who are doing this, who dispute what I'm saying, I'd like to get your side of the story, because the cases that I've seen just indicate that this is an asset stripping exercise and it's being done on a mass scale. And I can actually say this with some confidence because of the information I've been given. There was 2 cases that we followed very closely. One was a young lady whose flat was stolen from her. Stolen, yes, it was stolen because the company that took the flat took it for a fee of about £2,000 that was outstanding for management fees. She had £140,000 equity in the property. So how can that happen, people may ask? Well, if you go to the High Court, they will tell you that there is some doubt as to whether judicial review runs to the county court. This is what a master at the Royal Courts of Justice told me when a friend of mine had a council tax bill that was being used to steal his property by a third-party solicitor stroke debt collection company. Now, this is, as I say, going on a mass scale, and it's been withheld from the public. Now, the thing is with all this stuff, it's starting to go into the public domain because of this rape case, this trial that collapsed, where all of this evidence was not disclosed, and it's now in the public. So anybody who's got stories to do with this, especially in criminal courts, please get in touch, because this really does need to be exposed. We're going to talk tonight to James, who's had quite a lot of interaction with the police and the courts. Not that he's done anything wrong, it's just that he was uncovering what was going on. And some of you may know him from his YouTube videos of several years ago, when he was having some quite interesting, shall we say, interactions with the company Capita, who are third-party agents for television licensing. And of course, that's another big issue that's going on. You've got these Capita goons who con their way into your house if you let them, or they go down to the court and they get some fake county court paperwork to say that they've got a warrant, and then they enter the property with the police. Now, the thing is that the police will act on these fake county court warrants. And I say fake county court warrants, that may be my opinion, but in the cases that I've seen, they are fake because they are not proper county court paperwork. A lot of these cases, and even the TV licensing goes into this, they've got people within the court who issue these warrants. And James can talk about that when he comes on. But this goes into everything. It goes into the people who read your gas meter, who say they can break in. They get these fake warrants at the county court. We've exposed the whole thing. It's the staff within the county court who are generating the paperwork. So what we've got here is a whole crime farming industry, which goes into equity, which goes into stealing people's property and basically extorting money from them through the lower courts. So it's a very, very big story, and we're going to be covering a lot more on it in the weeks to come, because this has been one of the biggest stories of the year. There's no doubt about that at all. But if you want to check what we've done, go and have a look at the national database, Most Wanted on Crime Stoppers, and you'll find how much it's been reduced. We have got most of it taken down. So if we can do it, or I can do it, then anybody can do it. So that means that you do have power if you are competent, and competency is the most important thing. There is nothing more important than knowing the law, knowing how to operate in it, especially when we've got the police and the courts operating outside the law. And as a little coda before we bring James in my particular case, which I've gone over and done several shows, which you can find on windowsontheworld.net and our YouTube channel, our own barrister really worked with the prosecution in our case. This is an actual fact. My testimony was completely undermined by the judge. The barrister never said a word about it. When I complained about this to her chambers, I got an abusive response, in my opinion. Judy Khan from Garden Court Chambers insulted my intelligence by sending me the testimony of the lying police officer, the clown in a costume, who assaulted me and lied. And she sent that as evidence that the judge was within his rights to read out what he said about me. And what the judge said in summing up was that I was aggressive to the police and told them to leave. Well, that's not what happened. They started to rough me up, so I couldn't give evidence. And then they prevented me giving evidence at the police station, and they destroyed the evidence of that assault in the police station. They perverted the course of justice. And what they did basically was they got the desk sergeant in on it, because the bag that held the device, which that recorded the assault, and the chain of evidence had all been abused. Their bag wasn't logged in or out, and it was ripped open when it was given back to this girl whose English was very bad. She knew nothing about the law, and they abused her in custody by not giving her a medicine. It's an absolutely shocking story, and there will be more to come on this, because now we've actually got that interview and the DVD. She is in no fit state to be interviewed, and she clearly doesn't even understand pace. And also, even if the assault had taken place, they took out the intent, because she was obviously very, very scared in the situation, because she'd been really badly beaten up by a woman and her son in her shop. So they even took away her right of pleading self-defence. So absolutely despicable, Kent Police. And now worse than useless Chief Constable Alan Pewsley, who's failed to respond to all of my notices. So yeah, we'll have more on this in weeks to come. I will do a show which describes the outcome, because we're taking things up a level now. But the police have acted absolutely despicably in our case, and in many of the cases that we're now getting to hear about. So Kent Police are number one, as far as I know at the moment, in the crime farming industry in Great Britain. But please let me know if there's anyone who comes higher on the list, so maybe they might get knocked off the number one slot. But that's going to be quite a tough job, I think. At this point, I'm going to bring in James, and we've had some interesting interviews over the years, starting out with TV licensing. Are you there, James?
Yes, I'm here, Mark.
Great. Well, I didn't know how much to go on about in that first section, because there's so much. In fact, it's mind-boggling. I've actually stopped thinking about this court case for the last few days, because there is so much to it on every single level that's wrong. And I know that you've had a similar experience recently. We're going to get to that later, because that's of a much more serious nature. And it parallels exactly what happened in my case, exactly what happened in the Liam Allen case, which has been thrown out. And it corresponds to what we're being told by the Inspectorate of the CPS and the Inspectorate of Police. In other words, if it's not the police that are blocking the evidence, then it's the CPS that aren't supplying it. And this just seems to be standard. It seems to be the norm. But first, Tony, before we get into the TV licensing, I'd just like to play that audio of the Chicharito, because it's quite funny. And I think that, just before we bring James in, play that, and we'll refer to that during the interview.
Because I have written something because I was requested to research a matter and provide a response. I have done that.
Excuse me, one moment. You just stated that you were requested to research a matter. Which matter did you research?
Well, excuse me, I'm not going to be cross-examined by you. If you're unhappy with what I have done, then make a complaint.
No, I'm just asking why you lied in the letter.
You're accusing me of lying now?
I'm telling you that you're lying.
In which case I'm terminating the call. Good day.
Please leave your message for Giovanni Cacchiacaro after the tone.
Hello, Mr. Cacchiaro. You've just slammed the phone down on me. I'm going to give you one more chance to respond, because this is a public domain issue. And all of the people who have lied in the legal department are now public. This is a public domain issue, and you are required to respond. I'm going to read out what you wrote to Gordon Henderson MP. Mr. Frith has previously requested a copy of the interview disc. Mr. Frith has never requested a copy of an interview disc. The interview disc was requested, as you know, by Saunders Solicitors and myself on behalf of Saunders Solicitors. I have been assaulted. My evidence was blocked by Kent Police. Kent Police perverted the course of justice, and they've agreed to all this. Alan Pewsley has agreed. Your Chief Constable has agreed with my evidence. I have had your most wanted Crime Stoppers gallery taken down after contacting Lord Ashcroft. This proves that Kent Police are crime farming. They are putting people on their most wanted gallery who are not most wanted. It's very serious, and you are required to respond. Your name is in the public now, and this is a public interest matter. The fact that you had a tantrum and slammed the phone down when I gave you some evidence in writing from yourself proves that Kent Legal Services and yourself are showing contempt to the public that they serve. So you are required to respond. My phone number is 07865 217 637. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry to interrupt. You'll have 20 seconds to finish.
Okay, so that was quite interesting, because this Giovanni Cicciario, he wrote to the MP, Gordon Henderson, on my behalf. And he stated that a third party had requested the interview of this lady in custody, which was a complete lie. The only email that had come from this third party was requesting the legal obligations of Kent Legal Services Legal Department. So in other words, it was just an inquiry as to what the rules of disclosure are, and he gave me those rules. So he's an absolute liar. And they've spent 2 years, Kent Police have spent 2 years lying, obfuscating, and then in the end saying we were out of time after we'd actually requested this. We'd requested this interview through the solicitors in November 2015. It arrives over 2 years later, and that was never presented to the court. The actual thing clearly shows that the lady in custody was begging for her medicine. She was shaking. It was completely ignored. And her testimony, which would have proved that she was in fear of being assaulted, was all removed. So this is criminal. These Kent Police are acting criminally. And there's another report that we're going to go into maybe a bit later about people who are in a young offenders institution and assaults by Kent Police. So, yeah, I can't think of any other constabulary in the country who's number one at the moment. But as a little coda again, Tony, could you play the audio of the call to the Legal Services Department so people get a bit of an idea of what's going on?
Good afternoon, Legal Services. Sarah speaking.
Hello there. I just want to get some reaction from you about an audio of an interview that was requested on the 15th of November 2015 by recorded delivery. And 2 years later, all this we've had from Legal Services and the IPCC at Kent are excuses and lies and obfuscation. Now, the transcript of this interview appears to have been doctored. The police involved with this case perverted the course of justice and destroyed evidence. I have evidence of that, which is going into the public domain. Now, Alan Pewsley has failed to respond to all of my correspondence over the last 2 weeks. We're going to put it in the public domain on Monday that he's refused to respond, and he accepts now everything that we're saying, and it's going on national radio. So for the last time, I'm going to read out something that was sent from your legal department by Mr. Giovanni Cicciario on the 22nd of the 9th, 2017, just in case people in the Legal Services Department aren't aware of the law. It states here in my request to him about disclosure of defence evidence. This is from your legal department. The Police Service and the Crown Prosecution Service have disclosure obligations under the Criminal Procedure and Investigations Act of 1996. In particular, there is a duty to disclose material obtained during the course of an investigation which is capable of undermining the case for the prosecution or assisting the case of the defence, subject to public interest immunity. That was also from your Legal Services Department on the 22nd of the 9th, 17, along with many other emails which I'll be putting into the public domain. And we have never had that audio. Kent Police have that audio, if indeed it exists, and if it doesn't exist, we need to know why, because the interview transcript has got no audio tape reference number and no officer number. So we're going to accuse Kent Police of not only perverting the course of justice, not only of assaulting a witness to prevent that witness giving evidence, not only just destroying evidence, but also putting people on the Crime Stoppers website who shouldn't be there because they've all been removed. Alan Pewsley has, by taking all of those people, over 250 people, off your most wanted website, admitted they shouldn't have been there in the first place. Someone's life has been ruined because of Kent Police, and on Monday it's going on national radio. What have you got to say about that?
I'll make a note of your comments and pass it on accordingly.
Okay, so why have we not had the audio CD?
I can't comment, obviously, on what other departments.
No, I'm talking about your department. You're the Legal Services Department, aren't you?
You sent it through on the 15th of November by recorded delivery.
2015.
Sorry, 2015.
Oh,
April 2015.
Yes. That's why I'm...
right.
The reason I'm calling you is because we're now putting all this in the public domain. We've had Kent Crime Stoppers Most Wanted gallery removed. I got in touch with Lord Ashcroft and he's acted accordingly. He's the only person to act accordingly. Kent Police have acted against the public interest, as they have before, and have been exposed for doing so. So now they're going to be exposed again. And all of the people that I've been involved with, all of those emails are going public on Monday. So I wanted to know, is there any chance that you can remedy this for me today and make sure that CD is sent to us by Monday morning?
I can obviously undertake some inquiries to see what...
Inquiries have been going on for 2 years. Obfuscation and lies have been going on for 2 years. I've got all the emails. They're ridiculous. The excuses are absolutely an insult, basically, to the public that you serve. They're an insult. And they're all public now. And I have all the phone calls as well. They're all recorded.
So this phone call's recorded then, is it?
Every phone call is recorded.
My phone call with you now is being recorded, is it?
I'm asking you for a comment. Are we going to get that CD by Monday or not?
I will undertake some inquiries and we'll respond to you. Do you have an email address that we can respond to you on?
You have all my details.
Okay, we'll undertake some inquiries and we'll respond to you accordingly. Okay?
Hang on a minute. If I don't hear from you by the end of today and that audio CD has not been found and sent, we are going to state that Kent Police are once again perverting the course of justice. Is that clear?
Yeah, that's fine. I'll make a note.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
bye-bye.
thank you. Bye.
Yeah, I think that puts things into perspective for people who haven't actually caught up with this case. And in the end, the DVD did not come from the police or the CPS. It came from the Criminal Justice Unit. And the whole thing about this is the bigger picture. And we're going to be talking about that tonight. It's absolutely shocking. And this must be going on a mass scale, because this incident that I was involved in, well, my friend was involved in, and I was a witness, must be the tip of the iceberg. These small incidents are going on all the time. A chap called Matt called me from Birmingham after he'd heard the interview on the Richie Allen show, and he said, "Oh, I'm really glad that I heard that because it destroyed my life. I got accused of an assault." And what happened was this fellow was walking down the road, Matt. He'd come out of a pub and someone run him over very slowly. And he fell over. He had words with the driver. The driver was drunk, been drinking, smelt of alcohol. The driver then got out of the car, beat him up. He was walking away, this chap, Matt. He was walking towards his house. Fella grabbed him from behind, threw him on the pavement, started knocking his head on the pavement, beating him up. He gets up eventually and manages to throw a punch. The fella gets a black eye. Then the fella calls the police and says he's been assaulted. The police breathalyse him, and the police find out that he is over the limit, but they take him into custody. And they couldn't do a blood test because he had to go to hospital. And of course, they couldn't produce it in court that he was drunk driving. It's absolutely unbelievable. And this fella got it was actual bodily harm, the charge, and he appealed. He was guilty to start with, and then he appealed, and it was thrown out. The jury acquitted him basically, but he's still got this charge for assault, but he didn't go to prison, so he had to do community services. But he still got a record. He still got a record because he had actually assaulted this chap, and this fella got away with it. So this is crime farming from a different angle, and it's going on all the time. So hopefully we can really, really expose this year, get more people on board. We've only had one person calling us about this, and that's not enough. You know, we need to get more people on board, and especially in Kent, because there seems to be an epidemic of it. I'm just looking at this article. It seems to be that someone was charged with an assault who was working in a young offenders institution. I'm not sure how this ties in with Kent Police yet, so we won't go into that story yet because I'm still getting information on it. But the routine way that Kent Police seem to go about things by lying and assaulting members of the public is really shocking. But I don't think it's anything new, because in 2012 or 13, I think these officers were charged in 2014 after this investigation where they had been caught basically crime farming. they'd been stitching people up for crimes, basically. They'd been manipulating the crime figures and getting people to accept crimes that they hadn't done. And their 5 officers of Kent Police were actually sacked. They were arrested at their desks. So how bad does it have to get? Well, it got that bad, and what's happened? Nothing, absolutely nothing. And in this other case, the Met Police are now saying, oh yeah, we're going to have to review the situation after this rape case collapsed. But again, it's all down to the police and the CPS. They're controlling the narrative here. So that's a bit of an interesting start to the show there. And I'd like people to really go into those shows and have a listen to them, share them, because we want more people to come forward. So, James, you're still there. What do you make of all this?
Yeah, well, you summed it up quite well, right, in the first opening, the opening paragraph to the show there. And you mentioned no remedy, but more to the point, no remedy at any level. Mm-hmm. And that ties in with what I've discovered, and all my experiences amount to that fact in the end of it all. It's all in the public interest. You mentioned that, and the disclosure of defence evidence is a big one, which I think we're going to go into later. But I think you mentioned that we were going to have a little bit of a giggle about some of the lighter things, how it's all started in the from the beginning there, and how we even got to where we're doing now. I think as well.
Absolutely, because you contacted me a few years ago, and it was about the time of the People's Voice. I think it might have been before that.
Yeah, I mean,
wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I started around 2010, 11, and the first visits I got from TV licensing, which was my first case, it came to my door, didn't ask for it. That's why I got involved in it, and that's what's happening now with people. It's all coming to the doors, and I think I got really miffed because I had physical evidence of fraud and perjury. And this is the first time I'd ever had any dealings with any courts myself in my lifetime. So I had to learn a lot, and I didn't sort of start looking into things until perhaps 6 months, a year later. But at the time, it felt bloody awful because I got a warrant served to my door. But I started making a report on this, and I got to about 22 pages into my report, and I felt like I'd got the basics there. It's about 150 pages long now, this report for the TV licensing case. And I emailed it to you, and I think this was around 2012, 2013. And you basically responded within an hour of sending it to you, Mark.
Well, we were right on it then. It was quite interesting. I think the thing is that I'm beyond jaded with it, because when it gets to the point where somebody gets completely stitched up for a crime that's got serious consequences, going to prison, we're on a totally different level. This stuff that we're going to talk about later is hugely serious, and it's scary in the respect that the police can do anything they want. And if the public don't believe that, then they need to wake up to it fast, because this is the tip of the iceberg, what's come out with this rape case. This has been going on a mass scale. You can tell what's happening. If a few people are coming forward and I'm finding these things out, and it's happened to me, and the police are treating me with contempt, they're treating many people with contempt, because I've told them all this is public domain. I've told them I'm putting it into the public. I've told Alan Pusley from Kent Police that all this is now on national radio. I've even sent him the radio shows, and he has a minion. He hides behind this woman called Sonia Granston, who's just a liar. And then she's basically, in her last correspondence, she doesn't correspond with it anymore, because I just send them all the information I've got and all the lies. I just print all the lies that they've told, and she can't really respond to that, but she just responds with more lies. And then she actually stated in her last email to me that we were out of time to get the DVD. Well, that's strange, isn't it? Because it turned up 2 weeks later, but not from them, from the Criminal Justice Unit. So the lies and the treachery of these so-called public servants is despicable, and people need to start taking them to account, which is what we've been doing for quite some time, really. And you were quite courageous with it. We were getting a lot of success with these bailiff companies. I mean, the initial... the starting point of all this was council tax, and we were questioning the legality of council tax. Then we went and found out that the courts and the councils, it's basically one body. Now, in Halsbury's law, this is not even lawful. It does state in Halsbury's laws of England that the prosecuting body with council tax is all rolled into one. In other words, they are the court and they are also the issuing body. So
judge, jury, and executioner is what we say, isn't it?
Absolutely correct, and that is against the laws of England. Administrative courts can never be lawful. Which part don't they understand? So that means that they're all acting outside the laws of England, the laws of the land. And anyone who thinks that Brexit's a good idea, which it's just going to get worse. Brexit's a bad idea. And the Remainers, for instance, they don't realise that what the European Union is about is taking away even more of our rights. We are going to have a complete police state here. We've already got Interpol interfering with the help of the London Transport Police. And our show on scrap dealers, and Alan Gowing, the scrap dealer who got basically illegally raided or unlawfully raided, shall we say, by British Transport Police. And then he got taken into custody and basically tortured. I mean, this is just shocking stuff. People go on about third world countries. Well, what happened to him, I don't think would even happen in a third world country, because he'd be able to give them some sort of bribe. But when you're up against people who actually describe themselves as knuckle draggers, and they're actually going to beat you up, and there's nothing you can do about it. You're in private property in their depot, and you've been taken there, handcuffed and shackled in a van and rolled about and taken over every speed hump they can find. So he was bruised like anything when he got there. They pulled him out, and then they said they were going to get the knuckle draggers. I mean, the public would not believe this. They just wouldn't believe it happens until it's happened to them. And of course, we had Dave McCann on talking about his case, and all of these are great stories, but they back up what's going on now. It's obviously been going on forever, but the point is that because the system has changed so much and our rights are being taken away, then this is what we're going to see more and more of. It's basically a police state. So anyone who wants to remain in the European Union is asking for a bigger police state, because the laws of England have been undermined, or the laws of the UK, if you want to call it the United Kingdom of England, Scotland, Ireland and Wales, Northern Ireland and Wales. The point is this, that our laws have been completely undermined. If you've got Halsbury's Laws of England stating that the council are not allowed to do what they're doing, and they're doing it in the courts under the banner of working within the Ministry of Justice, then what does that tell you? It means anything goes, doesn't it, James?
Yeah, I mean, like, the key sentence out of that is they don't believe it until it's happened to them, and that's obviously that's what got me started in it. But the stuff that we're going to be talking about tonight is at the highest levels. I mean, cases that are absolutely, totally significant in the public interest. Cases of, we could talk about cases of rape, people who have been accused of, committing rape.
Well, your case, the case that we're going to talk about later, which is a third-party case that you've got, you've been party to, is really shocking. I mean, this is what would have happened in the Liam Allen case if that disclosure had not been made in time. He would have ended up in prison, as your friend has.
Yes, well,
absolutely horrific.
He's looking at 13 years, Mark. And what's incredible about it, let me ask you this question. If a murder took place where 5 people were in that house, would all those people not be questioned?
Exactly.
Well, we weren't, because I happened to be in a house for the first time ever, staying over one night, where an alleged rape took place, and I was there. And it never happened. Totally outright lies. And that's the significance of this. I just happened to... I was just a passerby, and I just happened to just come across this case. And it's
those 2 clowns in uniform, Wood and Chase, from the crime farming constabulary of Medway, who assaulted me and blocked my evidence and basically lied to the court. And then what happens? My barrister, or our barrister, turns around, the lady's barrister who got accused, turns around and says, well, the police said that you were aggressive. And the whole point was all that evidence, or any reference to the police was meant to be kept out of the court. And the judge, in summing up, said, "Oh yes, and you were and Miss Fry were aggressive towards the police and told them to leave." And he told that to the jury in summing up. And she said, "Oh, I don't think it really undermined your testimony. This is absolutely incredible. Nobody would believe it." But let's get on to something lighter first. I hope we've whetted people's appetite because we're getting onto some really heavy stuff later on. But the thing is that all of this stuff stems from basic administrative errors lower down, and these administrative errors become corruption. And once corruption starts, where does it end? That's the point. It means that the actual system of law is so broken that it cannot be enforced properly. And if this is why we were so serious, I think, about these council tax and TV licensing issues, because they highlight the bigger picture. So that's the whole point. So people say, well, how's that connected to a rape case? Well, it is, because if you've got prosecuting bodies and courts who openly are the same thing, well, where does that end? It doesn't. It can't, because it's all linked in. And the police are now acting way against the public interest, and yeah, let's get more of that out. But let's go into some of this earlier stuff, because I remember those days of council tax, and we made that film Councils, Courts and Con Men, and I believe that clerk who was shouting at us while we were sitting in the public gallery and threatening, and he called the police, and the police ran in with tasers. I believe he left the area because it was so embarrassing for him. But the point is that that video highlighted a lot of what was going on in the courts and how ridiculous it was. Now, council tax is a big issue with people because they're struggling to pay it. It's going through the roof, and they don't get anything for it, really. You know, the whole point is that councils are now acting way beyond their authority. Well, they have authority, but they're acting way beyond their capacity, at least, because their arrogance is unbelievable, and anybody who's had any interaction with them knows this. So why would it be different in the Crown Prosecution Service? Why would it be different in the police? Because they're just training these drones, these change agents, and I hear it all the time. And my life has been made a misery by these people for 2 years, and it also ties into what's happening with this Saul Alinsky programming within society, but that's a separate issue. Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, introduced by David Cameron. In other words, radical communist subversion is the way of Britain. That's what it's about, radical communist subversion. And people go, it's not a communist country. Well, I think you need to rethink that. But the thing is, with all this stuff about when we got Land of the Free together, we were getting loads and loads of hits on that. And it's quite exciting because we felt that we were pioneering something. We were exposing what was going on in these administrative courts, and it was fraud. In a broad sense, it was actually fraud. And I proved with one of the cases that I took on, which was about this single thing called a single person's discount validation form, which was sent out by a private company called Data Tag, purporting to be a council document and creating fraud because it was implying that the public had to fill it in, otherwise they could get fined. Now, I put that out into the public domain. I won the court case. The judge agreed with my position, and he said, no, you don't have to fill that form in. You can supply the evidence yourself. So when the councils say you must supply this information, the information you supply to the council is that you are the sole occupant of the property, nothing else. And if they get insistent on it, all you have to do is get a statutory declaration or affidavit. And when that's presented in court, the judge will go, well, he's given us this, which is what he did in my case. What more do you want? So he just made me sign one side of the form and give it to the council directly, which cut out this third party called Data Tag. Well, all these things are important because they highlight this abusive process. And it gets to the point where you've got these bailiff companies like JBW, who I think they clamp my car nearly every week. I mean, every time I went out there was a clamp on. We took them all off because they were illegal. We proved that they were illegal. And people get too scared with this sort of thing when they're dealing with these criminals, because when people are making up their own fees and saying you owe us this, that's extortion. It's not through a court. So these so-called bailiff companies are acting privately, you know, and if somebody is acting unlawfully, and I proved this, I got my friend's car unclamped by one of these companies because I said you're trespassing on a trust property. The car was in trust, but he was throwing bits of law at me and giving me legal advice. Another very important point for people, isn't it, James, that when these unqualified people give you legal advice, then they're breaking the law. 7 years in prison for giving legal advice. I've never given legal advice, have you?
Nope. I'm not qualified to do so.
Exactly, and that's one thing we never do. What we do is refer to cases and refer to the law, but that's not giving legal advice. I don't suggest that anybody does what I do. I'm stating that what happened. I'm stating that those bailiff companies that we exposed, their fees were unlawful. There's no doubt about that because there's no accounting. So in a court of equity, there would be no accounting. They just make it up. In that case, it's a fraud and it's a criminal offence. So you are perfectly entitled to release that vehicle. I mean, these people who are enforcing this, and we uncovered that JBW group, and they wrote to me. They got this big city lawyer who was doing some work on the side for his own company, who called St. John Legal, and he actually signed himself St. John, which I think the Vatican might have a bit of a problem with, as he's certainly not being beatified by the Pope. The whole thing is ridiculous. And this is another thing, isn't it, that you never get anything back that's signed properly. There's no real documents. I mean, documents used to have a seal on and be signed. This is the whole point of legal documentation.
Rubber stamping and just these electronic authorised signatures that they leave behind with no actual name on it for accountability.
Yeah, well, tell us a bit about your interactions with TV licensing, because that ended up quite serious in a way.
Yeah, we like to sort of start off with these things because TV licensing is something that everybody can relate to on a local level, and that's really the sort of things that I've been talking about, is stuff on the local level. So you're talking TV licensing, you're talking local council. God, everyone knows, everyone's like interested in anything talking about the council, because basically they're paying, the council are just taking everybody's money with nothing to show for it, and they can't tell you where that money's going. You've got the the child support agency and the way that they make claim to money and just don't respond to any of your queries or anything like that. You don't get any responses. But when people are actually coming to your door, that's when it's a little different. Now, the first time I got really taken back was probably a few years before my first case. And I remember a guy coming to my door, and it was a TV licence, and he started reading me my rights, Mark. He started saying, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say, can use.
So in other words, the police are involving themselves there because it's been turned into...
No, this is not the police. This is TV licensing.
Of course. Sorry, James. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Reading me my rights at the door.
Yes. I just thought that was impossible. You see, that is. I'd forgotten about that aspect of it because that is so ridiculous that some minimum wage goon from Capita can start reading you your rights.
Well, it scrambled my brain because I'd never seen anything like it, but a police constable reading anyone the rights, and only when they're being arrested.
Yes.
So I was really, really shocked, and it's not until I sort of settled down in a new house with a toddler and a newborn baby, so I'm a father of two, and that is when I really started to sort of look at life, because having children alone just like shocks your consciousness. I mean, you talk about consciousness, it can have a whole show of its own. But it shook me in a very real, earthly, human way. And I felt really shocked by it. So I decided at that time when I started getting settling that, because originally I had, sure enough, a TV licence at this new address, and I cancelled it. And they'd even refunded me for my last payment because obviously I wasn't watching live broadcasting anymore. And I got a visit to the door, and I decided this time I wanted to record it because my last experience, I had some TV licence goon reading me my bloody rights. So he starts reading, he comes to the door and I video record him, and I think to myself, I'm doing the right thing here. This guy's come to my door, I've recorded it, there's no way he can lie. I've got it on recording. So I had 3 visits, and then a man named Neil Blood, for TV licensing, goes to Kirklees Magistrates Courts, and they apply for a warrant to come into my home. Now, this warrant has to be based off reasonable suspicion that I'm watching or recording live broadcasting, and that's it. You talk about the Communications Act of 2003, it's what the TV licensing will come when, they like to feel like they've got this authority, and they come to your door trained to project this authority. And the human, the normal man and working lady who's just going to work every day and they don't have time for anything because they're working and paying the bills 9 to 5, They don't know any better. They sort of submit to this man, and because he's got some authority, he's going to be decent and he's going to be honest, and they just assume. So here's this warrant that's come to my door, and might I add, when these people go to the courts for these warrants, they've got to submit testimony under oath. That's usually in written form, maybe a page or two of statements, and they'll be describing the 3 visitations that they've made. And it's under oath, which means if the court to be lying and knowingly providing false information to the court so that they can get into this man's house or this single mother's house or this elderly lady's house who seems a bit senile and they think they might can take advantage of that. They get this warrant, they come to the door with police, so we're talking about public money here that's been wasted on a document, on a warrant from a court that was produced off fraud, and they come to me, and I'm a little bit like, no, hold on a minute, I recorded the contacts, and you don't get to see, all you get to see is the warrant. You don't get to see what was said, because it was all done without notice, Mark. No one told me, they just threaten you. But if somebody, random stranger, just come to my door and says, can I come in? And I say no, and he'll go, right, I'm going to go and get a warrant then. I'd laugh at him. And that's what we should be doing at these TV licence offices.
Well, it is laughable that they can even do that. But it's like these litter bandits, you know, who go around looking for people who might drop a cigarette and just following around people all day long. It's absolutely ridiculous now. And talking about Crown Court cases, they were outside Maidstone Crown Court. So all these poor people were probably going to get sent to prison, nip out for a cheeky smoke outside. And they can't find anywhere to stamp it out because there's no bins. And they're going to get done for that as well. Yeah. It's incredible.
It's just laughable. And actually, I mean, when we sort of get on the phone privately and we do talk about these things, sometimes we really do laugh at them. But I mean, the reason we're on the show tonight is because the underlying principle of it all, the very point of all this, is that it's very serious and it's against our interests. Bottom line. So. This warrant came to my door, and I was unsure, at the time. I was completely unsure, and I did eventually let them in under protest, and they come in, and Mark, there was no cabling coming into the house, let alone into the back of a TV. It was a joke. I got them to leave, and I had a little quiet chat with the lads outside, the constables, and they're in car, and they were a little bit stumped by it, and they're like, well, yes, but our job is to maintain, impartiality and all that. And I'm like, hold on a minute, when you come to my door, constable, you put your foot over my threshold so I couldn't even close my door. You enforced this warrant for them. That's how they got in the house. Yes. So there was that issue. Then, long story short, of course, I followed this up maybe a year later, and that's, I think, when I got in touch with you, Mark. And I learned that what I had to do was actually get in touch with the courts and make an application for what's called the deposition, if anybody's interested. And it's basically the information laid on oath. It's basically what they said about you. It's just you wanting to know. Now, so I get this deposition and it's lies. So I think, right, and because I'm just opening up to this, Mark, it's my first case and I've had these instincts that I've not been acting on for a long time. Now I'm a father. And I'm like, this is just general, everyday, normal man stuff. I'm not legally qualified. We've sort of admitted that already earlier on when you asked me if I'm legally qualified. And so these people are coming thinking that they've got authority, using all these legal terms, quoting laws, and they're not legally qualified, violating your rights and your privacy and all the rest of it. So I think, right, this is massive fraud and perjury, and it's BBC. It's going to be, someone's going to look at this, and it's going to be well known and spoken about. And I felt good about that. So I go to the courts and I tell them everything that's happened. And after 3 months it was a grueling experience, Mark, just to see what they heard. In fact, worse, you've got to apply for it. I mean, it's really sort of sketchy the way you've got to get this information that resulted in 4 guys marching into your home. And I thought, brilliant, I'm going to get this sorted. So I go to the courts, they're not interested. I go to the police. I take all my evidence down. I take the deposition. I've got a tablet so I can show them the recordings and show how the recordings of the visits are different to what was said in the information laid on oath. Just keeping it simple, guys. These guys have gone to the court.
Okay, James, what was the difference then? Can you relate that?
Sure. For one thing, they claimed that a telly was being heard in the premises in use. Mark, you could hear me coughing. You could hear the door being opened. You could hear every little pin drop in the room because it was completely silent.
Yes.
His claim was just outrageously a lie. This is what I'm saying, people. It's like, and I'm holding a video camera in front of him, and he's got the balls and the gall to go to a court and commit perjury because he knows he's going to get away with it, Mark. And that was the first, wow for me. And then when I went to the police and discovered that they weren't interested, and I just so that people know as well, I actually went to the police, and the inspector that rejected me, I made a complaint against him for doing so, and it was upheld, interestingly enough. But so they threw me a bone, but then wouldn't proceed with the actual case. Then I followed all of the complaints procedures leading right up to the BBC Trust and got an actual written response from them. And that took a long, long time, over a year just to do that. And in the end, Mark, they said, this is what they turned around to me and said, after I provided all the evidence, I kept it really simple by the end of it because I know that they're not going to go through all this long-winded stuff. You just keep it to a few points. And they turned around and said that the videos, the recordings that I made of them at the door cannot be used as an accurate account of what was said. So they can't use...
Well, of course not, because only they can have an accurate account of what wasn't said. Same as in this case that we're talking about the same thing, aren't we? I mean, basically, you can't have the DVD of the interview because the transcript's different.
The transcripts that we wrote up. So we did this interview, and we went away and we transcribed every little bit of it like we're supposed to do and sent it to the courts. Only there's 10 minutes missing out of it.
Exactly. Well, it's the same thing, really, isn't it? I mean, it's unbelievable. But
that's at the local level, isn't it? That's at the really small local level, and that's what we're talking about here. Light stuff that the everyday, because we're talking about, injustice going on at the highest levels here with criminal cases, very serious matters, all in the public interest, and we're saying it's all outright corrupt to the very top levels of things, how it's working, and people are just even still now. After it's all been blasted out into the public domain via the incredible internet that's taken over the world in the last 20 years or so.
Yes, good analogy though for the public to get their heads around. If they want to know how bad it is at a high level, just think of it in terms of a parking ticket and what that makes you feel like, and how unjust the process is, and how violated you feel when you get a parking ticket that's not warranted.
Or just.
Yeah, just.
It's not just.
And this happens all the time. I mean, the lying of these criminals who are issuing tickets in London, in certain parts of London, is unbelievable, the lies that they'll tell. But why don't they get prosecuted for it? I mean, as you say, if it goes to court, they're committing perjury, but also lawyers got involved. I mean, my friend's mother, she's at 80, and we put a parking permit onto the car. And of course, this goon from Camden Council is writing down my registration number and tapping it all in before the hour's up. So she goes out, has a word with him. And the next thing is that we get the ticket. I complain about that. And he's then said that one of us drenched him in water, and then we all drove off. Well, there was no log of when he turned up back at the town hall or wherever he went, or to the NCL, isn't it? Now, it used to be National Car Park, NCL, yes, in partnership with your local council, as they say. Well, there's no record of any of that. And the next thing, get this, I get a letter from Camden solicitors telling me that if I ever assault any of their staff again, they're going to take me to court.
Wow.
And it's like, but there was, for one, nobody was identified as actually throwing water on this idiot, and 2, it never happened.
Well, let me ask you this, Mark. I mean, it's absurd. I know, it's totally absurd. And this is just these are light stuff that everyone can associate themselves with, just really small things. But I mean, at any time in that, Mark, did anyone once from their side of things phone you up to at least hear your side of the story on a human level?
The way the CPS act, and in the CPS, I mean, I gave witness evidence in Crown Court in front of the jury, prosecution, defence, the CPS recorded it, and the judge.
Yeah.
And I was told by the CPS that I wasn't in court.
Yeah. Even though you were in court, and there's a court record of you in court.
Exactly. And I was told that I wasn't a witness.
Yeah.
So, can I turn around and say, well, there wasn't a court case then?
Right, yeah. So the whole thing should be dismissed because it doesn't exist.
Yeah. Well, just before we go to the break, James, can you tell us what happened with these when the CID got involved? Because this is going to blow people's minds.
Yeah. It was shortly after the TV licensing case, and I was even still working on it at the time. And then again, same thing. Something else comes through the door, and it's a summons to go to court for unpaid council tax for a previous address. And that gets quite interesting because I wasn't even living at the address at the time that the believed me for, and I could prove it. So it goes on to that, and it leads on to me again now understanding that you can go to the courts and challenge it, and go to the courts and find out why you're being summoned, what is the information, because a complaint's being made against me. Someone's made a complaint against me. That's how these courts work. It's called a complaint.
Yes.
They've complained about me, and I want to know who's complained about me on a human level and know why they're complaining about me. And guess what? There's no information in the courts about that either. And there's no information in the courts because there's no actual court taking place. They're just using the court buildings. And we can explain how that works. But basically, on a simple level, I pursued this. I requested, eventually, a liability order was issued because whether you attend these courts when you're being summoned by them, and they're not courts, they're just, again, they're not courts, they're the court buildings. Well,
the council hire a room inside a building which is otherwise known as a court. Yeah.
Right, that's the best way to put it, exactly. So thanks for that. And so, again, where's the information? And there is no information. So I didn't like that because at that point, that told me straight away that the courts are corrupt. They're acting corruptly because they're outright telling me that I am liable. An order does exist. And I want a copy of it. And they're telling me that I need to go to the council because they retain all the records. So I says, well, are the courts not responsible for retaining any information that's generated as a result of civil and criminal proceedings? And he says, yes, of course. He can't explain why I've got to go to the council for that information. So it's a clear contradiction. And I remember his name. He's now retired. It was, I don't remember his name, but it'll come back to me. But I went again to the Deputy Justice Clerk and I pursued it. And we even got a recording of an actual council tax hearing taking place. And he's just an average man going into the court and requesting the information. And the way the magistrates acted, that information was put out into the public domain. So this video of an actual council tax hearing, when we're talking about the day it happens, when you go down to and it's just it's called the law courts, your local magistrates courts. And there's maybe several hundred, perhaps even 1,000 people there, Mark. And seriously, even on a human level, what magistrate or magistrates? I mean, it would take a team of them to go.
Well, what they do, as most people will know if they've been summoned, is they have the council outside in the court, outside the magistrate's room that they've hired, and they try and do a deal with you to pay it off. So that's really what it's about. It's about you trying to make an agreement with the council for the money that they say that you owe them.
Well, we figured that out, didn't we, when we started going down to these hearings and just watching and observing how they were taking place. And you're absolutely right. They'd stand outside the courts, and they're not court personnel. And I remember
magistrates. I mean, I had a very good magistrate when It's a slightly separate thing, but it's related to council tax. When the council issued me with a bill for the extra money that I didn't owe them because they'd taken away my entitlement after removing my reduction, which was an entitlement.
For a single person living on your own in a single house, wasn't it?
It was the sole occupation of a one-bedroom flat.
Exactly,
and,
right.
Basically, when I explained this to the magistrate, he said this should be heard by a district judge, and it was, and we won. So I would encourage people with council tax, if they've got a good case, just go and see the magistrates.
Yeah.
And if you've got a legally qualified magistrate, then they are more likely to listen. The ones who are members of the public, I don't think are really up on this. They're just they are just kind of proxies of the courts or their employers, the council, really, because that's what it is. As we know, it's a council issue. But what happened? I mean, with this, this was so ridiculous. Yeah. Just before we break, just round it up with what happened when this
round it up quite quickly. Basically, the council found out what I was doing to expose them, and they sent police round to a premises that I wasn't even living at the time. But they sent them out there for 3 months, I think it was total. It was every day that went on for quite a few weeks in between that. I had CID phoning round all of my family looking for me. I had CID on the phone threatening to find me and lock me up. I went down to the police to make a complaint eventually after phoning the CID department from which these people were coming from. Managed to happen to catch an actual CID officer in the office. He just happened to be there that day. Picked up the phone, give him all my details. He said, there is nothing on the system for you. You're not wanted. There's no warrants. There's no reason why police should be coming to your door like this. So that's the quick roundup, and I don't know how long we've got before break.
Well, that's it, really. I mean, it's just incredible. Now, most people would think, what the hell is going on here? Why are the CID getting involved in something like this? Well, it was basically because you'd written to this minion who had power above and beyond what she should have done, and is some kind of change agent within the council. And I think she was legally qualified, wasn't she? Was that the right issue?
Well, we think it was some sort of change agent. At the time, it may have even been the CEO. In fact, it was the CEO of the council.
So yes, if it was the third party, there would have been basically.
Well, she was the solicitor, Mark. The actual CEO at the time, she was just covering for the council. She was what was called as an interim CEO, which means that she was just covering for that position.
Basically, what had happened was that she kind of somebody there must have passed over this information to the police. They come to your doorstep.
Yes, but not the police. No. Because there was no police record of any of this taking place. So it also told me straight away that there's shadow operations. There's like splinter cells within the police that operate off the record and off the books. I think, yeah.
That's exactly what you've just explained. And, of course, this CID officer had threatened to kidnap you and lock you up. Yeah. And you phoned the police and told them, didn't you?
Yeah, I phoned in the police and I told them. And I never heard anything about it, to be honest with you. They completely shut it down. I went down to the police station, and in the end, Mark, they arrested me. And it was just a complete dog show. They put me in front of a mental health doctor because they tried to pass off that I was making statements that unusual presentations. Unusual. That's what the term that the mental health doctor said to me. You're making unusual.
Was the mental health doctor legally qualified?
No.
So he didn't know that whether it was unusual or not.
No,
and he didn't know whether what you were doing was legal or illegal, or
he didn't
just
care, Mark. What he did was he put a sheet of paper in front. He stopped me in my tracks. The minute I started asking him questions, the minute I started answering his questions with questions, he stopped and he slid a piece of paper in front of me and he says, "I'd just like you to sign this consent form." And I says, exactly. I said, exactly. I says, and I says, this whole thing is done by consent. And
well, was that to section you under the Mental Health Act or something?
Yes, that was.
Well, how can they do that? Because there used to be 2 doctors involved in a section. I think it's now 1. But most recently, when I looked at this, it was basically like some goon from basically a traffic warden or a civil enforcement officer can do the sectioning.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just like TV licensing, reading me my rights at the door, at my own door. It's just incredible. For what? And they say, "Do you understand?"
So that was basically there's the posting of somebody in a court. Which wasn't a court. Which wasn't a court.
That was the argument here, wasn't it? Because in the interview room, the officer was saying, "Look." She put the video up and she went, "Look, that's a court. Those are the 3 chairmen. Look, it's a court." And she wasn't listening to what I was saying. I turned around and I said, "So what's the court reference number then?"
Yeah.
And she was stumped because there is none. There was none. And I already knew this.
Where's the court record to see if the transcript of the court record actually tallies up with the recording? Let's see if that happens.
Yes, that would be interesting, wouldn't it? Only in that instance, that would be a high court because they don't really transcribe in these lower magistrates' courts.
It's a court of record, so
right,
they have to record of what happened in the court. But yeah, you're right, those administrative hearings are a sham. We did an interview recently, which I still haven't put up, with a chap in the northeast, and he really fought them, an ex-army guy, and he proved it was all fraud. Went to the police wouldn't do anything. I mean, I think we're kind of done with council tax and TV licensing for the moment, but we'll definitely come back to it. And it's a good thing to cut your teeth on. If you want to know how far the corruption goes, start there and work your way upwards. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back in a few minutes.
Welcome to Conditioning. No one could have dreamed we were being scrutinized.
14.
No one could have dreamed we were being scrutinized.
14.
No one could have dreamed we were being scrutinized. No one could have dreamed we were being scrutinized as someone with a microscope studies creatures that swarm, multiply in a drop of water. On other planets, we were being scrutinized. We were being scrutinized. Possibility of life on other planets. We were being scrutinized. And human affairs were being watched from the timeless worlds. No one could have dreamed we were being scrutinized as someone with a microscope studies creatures that swarm, multiply in a drop of water. Slowly. Someone with a microscope studies creatures that swarm, multiply in a drop of water. Slowly.
How we can get this down to 0?
Last years of the 19th century, human affairs were being watched from the timeless worlds in his eyes. We were being scrutinized. We were being scrutinized. We were being scrutinized. We were being scrutinized. Slowly and surely.
Falling all the way to 0.
Slowly, in his eyes, they drew their plans against us.
get this down to zero.
No one could have dreamed we were being scrutinized. Images are someone with a microscope studies creatures that swarm in a multi-line network.
Make changes.
Slowly, they drew their plans against us.
Zero. Make changes that will bring that down to zero. Now we can get this down to zero.
Possibility of life. They drew their plans against us. No one could have dreamed that we were being scrutinized in his eyes. In the last years of the 19th century, we were being scrutinized in his eyes.
New World Order.
Regarded this earth
Make changes that bring that magic zero.
No one could have dreamed that we were being scrutinized in his eyes. In the last years of the 19th century, we were being scrutinized in his eyes.
The World Order.
Regarded this earth
Welcome back to Windows on the World. We're talking about crime farming, a subject that we've covered quite a lot this year, because when this stuff gets personal and up close, then you get a better perspective. And I've had that experience over the last couple of years. Other people are now coming forward who've had this experience. And of course, it's been all over the mainstream news. So guess what? We're not conspiracy theorists after all. This is actually even being reported by such worthy news outlets as the BBC and Sky News. So we can't be just conspiracy theorists, can we? We were talking just before the break, actually, amongst ourselves about a comment in the chat room, being sectioned, and the use of the Mental Health Act against people who actually are operating and standing up for their own rights. Now, it is actually quite a good idea to get an independent mental health assessment done. And we actually had a case where we did that because they were trying this garbage. But also, what's very important is that if anybody, such as a psychiatrist or mental health practitioner, starts to imply that by your actions you may be mentally unstable or mentally incapable, well, you need to ask them for their legal qualifications. And if they haven't got legal qualifications, they can be dismissed on the spot, and you'll need a solicitor present. So that's just a little side issue. But we're going to go into this case now with James, and we've gone in first half over things like how this started, the council tax, the administrative courts, how it goes into this bigger picture of corruption. Because, as we said in the first half, when corruption starts small, where does it end? Well, it ends with people going to prison for crimes they haven't done. So, James, I'm going to give you the floor now so you can give us an overview of what happened in this case, which ties into everything that's been exposed with the police and the CPS at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, rounding off the council tax matter where I was eventually arrested, and not because they found me or picked me up, because I physically went down to complain against them. They put me on what's called bail, and that basically just means that 3 days a week, and normally it's not so strong like that, but it's 3 days a week. I had to go to the station to sign in, Now, eventually, I mean, it was all for my inconvenience. I mean, this was admitted by them. They had the gall to actually just sort of look at me to my face and go, yeah, it's designed to inconvenience you because I'm having to go out of my way 3 times a week. And guess what? If I'm not there, I'm arrested.
This is a great point, James, to bring in our next part of the show, because that could possibly mean that you would be put on Crime Stoppers. Because
Possibly.
if they've issued a bail warrant and you don't turn up, then if you look at Crime Stoppers, most of the people on there are for that. So what I was saying at the time was that a lot of these people won't know they're wanted until they find out on there, and that's going to make them go on the run, especially from other countries. And this is really important. So Crime Stoppers is part of the crime farming process. And they also have a website called Fearless, and they're training youngsters to basically spy on their parents and everyone around them and report it anonymously to Crime Stoppers. How can you report something anonymously and it go to court? And they're using this evidence against people. So there's a lot going on here. We're going to be covering it over the next year. We've got plenty of time, and there's going to be plenty more on it. But your case is absolutely absurd because you found out that you weren't really even on bail anyway.
Yeah, there was no bail record. It's just a custody record that they've got of you. There's no authority for the bail. It's simply a made-up thing that they brought up and put me on it and threatened me with arrest if I didn't comply with it. So I was under duress the whole time. But I think it was actually going live on your show, Mark, that for some reason, halfway through the bail, they basically said you don't need to come down to the station anymore because there's not enough evidence to go ahead with a realistic prospect of conviction. And that was basically the end of it. And the matter is completely buried, of course. There's no record of anything, because it never happened as far as the police concerned. All the constables, the money wasted on the constables coming out to the house every day for 3 months. There'd be little gaps here and there, but it was all like really sort of crude stuff, like knocking on the door one day and then just being really quiet and putting the hand over the keyhole, or just buzzing in on the intercom system down at the bottom to see if we answer, to check that we're in, knocking on the door again, buzzing, putting the hand over the keyhole, trying it constantly, coming up to the door with a broadcasting camera. And again, I knew instantly that what they were doing at this stage was trying to get me on video, and again, accuse me of being a mental nut or a conspiracy theorist.
Well, I think all this actually came out of these videos on YouTube of you telling TV licensing where to go, basically, and what they were doing wrong. And obviously, you've needled them, and it's going to undermine the revenue of Capita. So that's quite serious, I suppose, down the lodge. You know, I mean, you might have been a target, you see. If they're having a meet-up down the lodge and go, this is bloke, he could be cutting into our earning capacity to find people through the courts. Can you help us? Yes, certainly. We'll go around and harass him. Maybe that's what happened.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened.
So let's go on to this bigger case now, James. This allegation that's turned into an absolute nightmare.
Yeah. Well, I'll just read this headline. Prosecutor slams sheer incompetence of police who deemed a rape victim's texts fantasizing about violent sex too personal to use as evidence, as the student she accused is now cleared. So what this is a girl who's accused, a 22-year-old Liam Allen. This is all public record. This is actually out of, was it the Daily Mail, I think, this one? Report by Martin Robinson, UK Chief Reporter for Mail Online, and Isabella Fish and Fionn Hargreaves for the Daily Mail. So, yes, it is the Daily Mail. Liam Allen, 22-year-old, was accused of rape, and the text messages that she was sending, fantasizing about violent sex that could have exonerated him, were held back. They were held out. They weren't submitted. Therefore, they couldn't have been considered. And if they can't be considered, they're going to proceed on the available information they've got, which is nothing but hearsay, because there's no evidence. Again, it's just here. They're actually proceeding on hearsay. And that this article really springs things to light because the case that I've been involved with, I'm actually a defence witness for.
Now let's get this from the beginning, James, because the CPS had rejected this case initially, hadn't they?
Yeah. So basically, allegations have been made. There were 2, and then later on 3 girls involved. So what's happened is the police have taken statements for this rape of allegation on this one guy, and they've sent it to the CPS. The CPS have rejected it on the grounds that it looks like they were all getting their heads together to screw the guy over.
A conspiracy.
A conspiracy. It looked like all
to
the
pervert the course of justice. Yes, a conspiracy to potentially pervert the course of justice.
So the CPS they saw through it. They saw through all, they saw through all of the statements, and they says, no, it looks like they've put their heads together. They looked at all the evidence and rejected it. So the officer in charge went out and sought out all the girls and brought them back into the station to redo the statements so they were more fitting for the CPS, to redo the interviews.
Are people out there taking this in? So in other words, if they can't create the crime, they recreate the evidence.
Yes, they recreate the narrative and the evidence, but the evidence is not, it's just pure statements. There's no physical evidence of any kind. I mean, we're talking about a rape charge here, so we're talking about potential medical records, or any history on that person where there's been any perhaps call-outs, domestic violence. I mean, they do a search on you in social services, for example, when there's a case with children, they do a background check and they produce a statement, and it has all of the history of any call-outs, because that's what they have to do. They have to get a bigger picture understanding of this individual. Has there been any previous records, blah, blah, blah. There's nothing. This is, a guy that's got no previous convictions for anything of the sort. So what do we do about that? I mean, this court's just proceeding on nothing but hearsay to begin with. How does that happen? Are we not a court of record, and do we not provide evidence for the things that we say to prove that in a court? Is that not how it works?
Well, exactly. I mean, it's the thing is, though, the solicitor in this case did bring up what was extremely important in our case as well, in that what that Giovanni Cicciario supplied to the third party when he lied about the application for the interview DVD. Yeah. What he was initially sent a request for was, what are their obligations? And their obligation is to provide any evidence which assists the defence or can undermine the case for the prosecution.
Right.
That is their duty. That is their legal duty. Yeah. They are duty bound by the laws of the land to disclose that evidence. So by withholding it, they are actually operating unlawfully.
Yep. It's gross negligence of duty, misconduct of public office, a crime against the accused, for one thing, a complete violation of the personal rights and liberties and freedoms that are unalienable. They're not actually written down on stone, our unalienable rights, unless...
Alienable, yeah.
Yeah, unalienable ones, that God-given rights that we were inherently born
with. This is the process of natural justice, which actually is a thing that does exist, because we have to remember that a lot of the law came from the Bible. So this is extremely important, that there is God's law and there is statute.
Yes, and there's a little message there popped in from Tony. I think he's listening. It's also against their oaths. It's against their oaths of office, yeah. Of course it is. The oaths that the judges take, the police constables take, magistrates, I mean, just about anyone dealing in law, any legally qualified solicitor is also, they swear an oath, and they are sworn authorised officers of the court. That's what you call them when you contact a court. You want to speak to a law, an authorised officer of the court who is sworn. You know, somebody that you believe that you can go to because they're going to act justly. They're going to hear your side of things on its own merit.
Now, this is interesting, James, because what you're talking about here is, again, what went on with this TV licensing thing at a lower level. In other words, the police are sort of taking it upon themselves to act in a private capacity, in the respect that if they don't like something, they'll do it again. Well, if it doesn't fit their procedures and the law, then why are they then trying to rewrite the law to fit what they want?
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of Brexit, Mark. We'll take a vote to decide whether or not we're going to stay in Europe or not. We vote to leave. They don't like the result, so they're trying to push to have a new vote, you know.
Yeah, they're trying to say that Farage is in favour of a referendum, which is not what he said. And of course, now it's put into the public narrative that there's going to be a second referendum.
Yeah.
The public are being manipulated on such a ridiculously silly level here.
Yeah.
Well, getting back to this, you were saying earlier on that basically what happens is hearsay becomes police evidence.
Yes, that's right. And what's strangely enough is that the judges in the courts that you would think are operating justly, looking at this, I mean, some do, don't get me wrong. There are cases where, you know, one day a judge couldn't be there for that case. He's been running it for the last 12 months, and he doesn't happen to be there. Another district judge comes in, looks at it all through again, and dismisses the damn case. I mean, these things do happen. There are good people within the system, but when you get instances where you are being affected by what seems to be in a private capacity, which is a contradiction, really, because the police and the courts are supposed to act in the public interest. They're supposed to act impartial. They're supposed to uphold the law. They took oaths to do so. And you think that when you go to these courts and you try and present information, whether it be from you or the police or anybody, that they'll look at that impartially and go, hold on, is there any evidence to back this up? So how the hell it even gets into a trial when it's just hearsay anyway is quite suspicious. And it's the police themselves who actually make these applications to the courts. And when you look at these cases, if you look at the actual the name of the trial, you'll notice that it's the police versus Smith or the police versus whoever. There's no actual name up there. There's no individual person who's complaining against you.
Well, in our case, it was Regina versus the accused, but Regina wasn't there, so we could always say that well, where was she?
That's commonsensical. I mean, that's what I encourage the general population to just start doing, because it's a very simple question. If Regina, whoever, has made a complaint against me, why is she not here today? Do I not have the right to face my accusers? I mean, these are things that the judges should be taking really seriously. It's called due process. It's something they're supposed to be upholding. And when they don't, that's your first inclination that what you're seeing is corrupt.
Well, I think another very similar thing that happened, I mean, there's so many parallels between the case you talked about and what happened with us, is that even the defence and prosecution seem to be working together.
Yes, in our case, there was an instance where it was quite common and often during the trial for both the defence solicitor and the prosecuting solicitor to go out back to have a fag together, to have a good old chinwag about the case. The negotiating is what they're doing. They're deciding themselves on the outcome and how they're going to play it, and they're revealing the cards to each other. And it shouldn't be allowed. I mean, it just shouldn't be allowed. There was and what's worse, and I can't even believe we didn't bring this up originally, Mark. When the trial first started, the judge was going on profusely about how it should be all beyond reasonable doubt, and also, this is the other one, that the votes from the jury should all be unanimous. So everyone in that jury has to believe either that this individual is either innocent or guilty. And in the end, there was two that wouldn't swear. So he says, 10-2, that'll do me. And he called it on that.
Yes, well, James, that's exactly what we got in our case. It was 10-2.
Yeah. When we started talking about this, we couldn't believe it. There was, 44,000 pages of evidence, Facebook messages and all this stuff. The police had 4 months to go through it. The police requested an adjournment to be able to go through it all. The defence solicitor wasn't giving it all until a week before the trial.
Well, that's the trial that collapsed. But in your case, it's kind of worse, isn't it? Because you've got a conspiracy there. And also, you stated to me when we started talking about this that the girl who made the allegation had done this.
Yes, she had previous convictions of doing this. She did it to her own father. Later, it was found out, proven by the police that she was lying. She was given a very serious warning for it, and none of that was included in the courts. The father, during the trial, the father of one of the girls who was accusing this man, wrote into the courts to say so, to give all this background. Her own sister stood on the stand and says, take everything with a pinch of salt, she's a compulsive liar.
Why was this not brought in by your defence then, or their defence?
Because the defence solicitor had, just during the trial, her husband died in a car crash and she was completely distracted.
Well, that's very unfortunate, but all this should have been passed on to the barrister.
Well, that's what we are concerned about, because the father of the man who's been accused is having trouble getting the court records. He doesn't even know what the court reference number is. And I tried to explain to him that there will be several references in these matters. There'll be a police reference number, and there'll be a court reference number. And the court reference number is the one that's never really used, but is primarily the actual main reference for the whole thing.
Well, our case number was known from the very start because the solicitor had that case number. And, of course, it wasn't heard for 2 years. Right. And in the meantime, this lady had been put on Crime Stoppers, libelled by Kent Live, which is one of these generic online newspapers, and it stated that she was one of a number of criminals wanted for rape, robbery and people trafficking, and her picture was very prominently in the top right-hand corner.
Yeah.
Well,
this man, this guy's it was put into the Telegraph and Argus, Mark. He was named. He's been publicly named and shamed for something that I know firsthand he didn't do, because I happened to be there. And I didn't even know these people at the time. It's the first time I'd ever met them in person in their house. I was a guest staying with a friend that night for the first time. It was just absolutely incredible. And up to that point, Mark, when obviously I'd been through all the previous cases, and I was listening to this case, and I've seen just about the impact it's had on the entire family. The father, get this, Mark, the father has to apply to the courts for the transcripts for what was said in the trial, because he needs to be able to prove that what they've said under oath in a court is lies, and he has physical evidence that will contradict these people.
In our case, it was quite easy to get the prosecution statements.
Right.
That wasn't an issue. And of course, they were what we relied on in court.
Right. Well, the father's been told he's going to cost him £7,000 to £10,000 just.
That's
to get
absolutely can't be true, James. It can't be true. Yeah. I think these court transcripts are about £140. This is absolutely astonishing. Yeah. I think he needs to get in touch with the court. In fact, he should really be making an appointment with a master at the Royal Courts of Justice to go through this, because it's obviously got to be reviewed. But this is starting to get to the point where it's now been proved that the police are actually creating these crimes. And that's not too strong a word for it, I don't think, because in our case, it was the police that created the whole scenario.
Well, they've got to fill the figures, Mark, and that's what they're doing. They've gone from doing due diligence and work, because I think as well, they don't have the time to do it because they know that the system they've got doesn't work. It's flat out failing. It doesn't serve the public anymore, and they need to be seen to be doing justice, and they're not doing justice. They're doing everything to the contrary. They're acting as criminals. And they are crime farming, and crime farming is what you call it when these people take evidence and make sure that it doesn't go into the courts, and then create new evidence and create lies that can only be used in the courts, because all the other stuff that's the really good stuff that should be considered as being deliberately kept out, that's crime farming. When you change the narrative, you're creating a crime that doesn't exist. And that's what they're doing.
Well, it is what they're doing, and they're obviously doing it on a mass scale. And I was talking to somebody last night, and I was going on about this, giving him a bit of background as to our case, what happened. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, I've got no respect for the police anymore. I said, why? He said, well, there was a stabbing outside where he lived, and he saw roughly what was going on, and it had all been totally misinterpreted, apparently, by the police. So he tried to inform the police and become a witness. The next thing is he's a suspect. He said, I'll never speak to them ever again.
Yes, I mean, it's really funny how you should say that, because even when I was in one of the interviews, when I was falsely arrested for the council tax case, I actually said to her, your job is to take all of the information. Your job is to take all the information and check to see if what I'm saying and what they are saying is correct, and follow that through. And if a crime indeed is taking place, you're supposed to act on that. But that works both ways. So if it turns out that what they are saying is in fact a lie, then you now need to go after them, because it's misuse of police power, for one thing, going out of the way to deliberately use the police to cause somebody harm, distress, alarm, or whatever the reason may be, or just to create, a crime, so that's another little tick on the figures for proving that the taxpayers' money is actually doing something. It's working. They need to be able to prove that. But it's, now we're not bothered about what the figures say anymore. We're bothered about what's really, really happening. We're not seeing it. We're not seeing it outside his own doors when crime is taking place.
Many people out there who are now saying that the official crime figures are absolutely being manipulated.
Yes.
And I think this is the case. There is crime that is not being reported. The police are burying it all.
Yes.
And if you happen to be a witness or involved in something, then you have to be very careful now, because they want at all costs a prosecution. And once they've got that net and you're in it, well, that seems to be the problem, because you have to then try and prove that you are innocent. And if they bury all the defence evidence and pervert the course of justice, what chance have you got?
Yeah, I see. None of us here are legally qualified. It's really hard to suggest what people do. The other problem is a lot of the remedy, like this rape case. It's possible that the father may have to liquidate everything that he's been working for in his lifetime to get the funds to get justice, when it should have been really served in the first instance. Just another example of how the justice system is completely destroying lives, and it's not just the individual, it's not just the accused and the accusers, it's the families, and I think it's happening on such a scale now that even the mainstream news can't deny it exists. It's like, when, back in the day when we all used to talk about the Bilderberg, they denied it even existed. Now the mainstream media have actually given it some attention, and they do refer to them as the Bilderberg group. They were spoken about in Parliament. I followed it. I watched the videos on it. It was discussed. And it was sort of, obviously it was talked down and all the rest of it. And it's nothing to worry about, blah, blah, blah. But, it's not looking like that. It's not looking like that at all. It's the mainstream media starting to identify it. It's slowly leaking in to the mainstream consciousness. And again, we could have a whole show on consciousness, but that's what it is, a very human level. If anything happens like this to anyone, I can only say what I've done, and I found that when I stood my ground and I just felt this horrible thing that didn't feel right, that instead of ignoring it, I'm going to face it and I'm going to act on it. And what starts to happen is your discernment picks up. It's like you develop what we can commonly call a bullshit filter. And
that's right.
It gets stronger, and that's what's happened to me. It's what's happened to you. It's what's happened to Tony here as well. And that's why we're on the show tonight, because we just wanted to. We've got really serious matters to talk about. We know.
I don't think it gets that much more serious, really. I can't think of anything that is more serious than this at the moment.
It's life and limb, isn't it? Really, it's life and limb. It's well-being. It's the well-being and future of not just our present, but God, when I visualise the future, it's hard to do it because it's so clouded with all this negativity, and I fear for the lives that my children will have to live, because who can prepare them for that? No one could prepare me for my life, and I just think that it's going to be much harder if the people now, when it really does come to your door, when you've got this ticket or this TV licence man, or some guy, you're in the city centre and some guy in a dressed up like a bloody copper, almost identifiable to a copper.
A civil enforcement officer,
right? Yeah. Comes up to you and tries to slap a £50 charge on for throwing a cigarette butt.
I think it's £80 actually, and then it goes up to £170 or something like that if you don't pay it straight away. Well, this happened to a friend of mine, and he was totally shocked. I mean, he had to appeal against it, and it went to court. And again, this goon was found to be lying through his teeth. His evidence didn't add up under cross-examination. So they put in these lowlives, really, into uniforms. Mm-hmm. And this is how tyranny works, isn't it? This is how the whole system of subversion works.
Yeah.
You get the worst kind of people and put them in jobs where they have power. That's all it is. And the law firm, not the law firm who represented my friend, but the barrister who was appointed by the law firm and her chambers, are absolutely despicable. These are people right in the heart of the legal system. They have many barristers. And the arrogance of this Judy Khan QC who wrote back to me, I could barely read the letter. Now, these people were meant to be representing us.
Yeah.
And they're including the lying, well, I won't call them police officers. I don't know what they were. These clowns who obviously got some police uniforms from a fancy dress shop and decided to come round and try and beat me up. Then those two, the testimony of Wood was read out in court. And then, of course, when I say it shouldn't have been read out because it wasn't true, they send me the police lying statement as proof that it was actually true. I mean, these people are unbelievably despicable. Yeah. And I want them all to be exposed, and they will be. And that barrister who represented us stopped the appeal. She said there's no chance of appeal. She wasn't even aware of the basic facts of the case. She said that it was me who had a problem with the police and not the defendant, which was very untrue. And basically she undermined my testimony. Now this is somebody who's getting paid by the Crown to represent us. And she stitched us up, basically, by doing that, because I told her things that she didn't want to hear. I wrote down all of these complaints. There were many of them. We haven't got time to go into them, but they're serious. And she even said that because this woman had had an epileptic fit before giving evidence, she was totally drunk, and she was the only witness. The son who was with her never actually saw the assault, and he said he heard a bottle smash, which was an absolute lie, because, get this, the police took the bottle that was alleged to have been used, but the bottle that the police took wasn't actually the bottle, because the bottle that my friend had been holding was actually in my possession. So the whole thing was... So in other words, there was no DNA taken. That would have exonerated her completely.
Yeah.
And it's the same.
Fingerprints of the bottle would have determined how it was held, and well.
Exactly, and it was the bottle was full of wine. So the woman's son actually lied and said it was empty, and then he said he heard it smash, but he never actually saw an assault. Of course, it didn't smash. I mean, the whole thing, there was no evidence for any of it.
Yeah.
We're talking about an absurd situation which any decent barrister would have got thrown out.
Mark,
what should have done was got hold of that audio recording straight away before the court case, because she wasn't in any state to be interviewed. She begging for a medicine. They had the medicine in the possession, and she's crying when the interview starts. She doesn't even understand pace. He said, "So do you have to answer my questions?" And she says yes. No interpreter present.
Yeah.
The lawyer didn't say anything until after she'd been interviewed for over half an hour. Of course, there's a 10-minute discrepancy in the transcript and the DVD, and it's absolutely unbelievable because the police would not disclose that. How can the police and the CPS refuse to disclose this evidence? And that's what this rape case, it actually had to be disclosed, but in our case, they wouldn't disclose it until 6 months after the trial.
Yeah, they're taking incidents that have happened as an excuse to go into court. They don't care about what the details are of that incident.
Exactly.
Because they only need the call out, the opportunity to get the forces out there. And then once they get there, they've got these constables who are not considering the details of the matter and just saying, right, this is a great opportunity. We're going to get into court now, and then we'll just make our own story up to fit it. And it's unacceptable. It's like I was in, you talk about the evidence not being included in court. Just over a year ago, I was assaulted, and as much as I would have liked to, I didn't retaliate. I did the right thing. I documented it all. I logged it all. Hell, I even recorded the whole matter taking place. Get to court, and I've got the defence solicitor questioning me while I'm on the stand. And he says to me, I put it to you that this man was never at your door. And I says, well, that's not true, for one thing. I says, and I recorded the whole matter. I says, I don't need to remember what happened. I can just transcribe the whole recording, aphrodise it, and give it to you. And he went, well, that recording is not in the courts. And I was like, what? The recording that the police heard, that the police took off me, that the police used this recording as the grounds and the evidence to charge and bring this man to court for assaulting me, and it gets to court and the recording's not there. How did that happen? Let me ask you, how did that happen? How was the recording that the police used to charge this man in the first instance not be included in the trial?
This is really down to the CPS, and I don't know what to say about it now, because in our case, the judge, in summing up, completely undermined my testimony. So he showed extreme bias, and we couldn't get him done for misconduct because they said, he's allowed to do that. Well, if it's agreed by all parties that it's not to be mentioned, surely it's not to be mentioned, because
Right.
I wanted the police in court because they'd assaulted me, they'd perverted the course of justice, they'd blocked all defence evidence.
Yeah.
I was the only defence witness. There were no witnesses to the assault, and I was the only defence witness.
What's
So
frustrating, Mark, is if I was in your position there, I'd be frustrated over the fact that it literally is your word against theirs. You know it to be true. You were assaulted, and that must have really pissed you off. And
Well, it does. And the thing is that on every single level in this case, it's been absolutely bent in
Ludicrous.
every respect.
Yeah.
And there's no one in that Kent Police Legal Services Department or professional standards who can tell the truth. None of them seem to be able to actually be caught in possession of the facts or the truth.
Yeah.
And that is the thing. And
The
of course,
other thing as well, Mark, is I've noticed as a lot is like when that's what they're scared of the facts. I think that's one of the reasons why they literally deny the evidence, is because obviously it wouldn't fit their narrative. Now, they're not interested in the justice. They just need the figure for the records, and that might be for your favour on this particular day. That may be against you. That's the only justice we're getting. That's why you see in cases that, there was no guilty, when really they were guilty, and vice versa. And that's really concerning as well, because we can't take the word of the courts anymore either. I mean, this murderer might could very well still be a murderer, and he might still go out there and do it again. And I asked the viewers and the listeners, do you know where we can go to get help? Do you know where we can go to get remedy? Because I don't know, because I've tried every method under the book, followed every complaints procedure there is, documented myself doing so no one can question me. And I still don't know where the remedy is. And that scares the hell out of me, Mark.
Well, there's one good thing that came out of our case, which I'd like to sum up, because your case is ongoing, and hopefully there will be justice there, because that's very serious. And
13 years, Mark.
Well, it's shocking. I mean, it's shocking. And if anybody out there thinks this won't happen to them, well, if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time and you meet the wrong person, it will happen to you. It absolutely will happen to you. But in summing up, I'd like to read out what the Attorney General's office wrote back to me, and in response to what they wrote back to me, what we should do, and in fact what we actually did. They stated about this case: if you feel that the police are abusing the Crime Stoppers website, then you may wish to complain to the Independent Police Complaints Commission. Well, has anybody ever tried that? It's an absolute ridiculous joke. I mean, how can they call it independent? It's just an extension of police corruption. It's an absolute joke that even exists. It's not fit for purpose. I mean, in the first instance, what they said was that I'd requested the DVD and I had no standing in the matter, but I never requested it. The lawyer requested it. So the IPCC either got it completely wrong or just lied. And then it carries on. If you feel that the Crime Stoppers are undermining the criminal trial process, then you may wish to complain to the Charity Commission. Well, no, I went straight to Lord Ashcroft because he's the head of chair of trustees. Why would you go to the Charity Commission? The Charity Commission, in this case, I don't believe would have done anything because it's too serious for them. It's too big.
Yes.
Can you imagine? Yeah. Can you imagine the repercussions of this? Crime Stoppers, which was started in the 80s by Lord Ashcroft to help the police catch criminals, is actually being used by the police to undermine trials and basically put people up there that they don't like.
Yes, I mean,
or people that might owe them a few quid.
Yeah,
you know.
I remember when I first got the deposition for the first TV licence case, Mark, and I was in touch with the local MP, Mr. David Ward, for Bradford East, I think it was. And I presented the deposition after 3 months, and he sort of humoured me for those 3 months, thinking that was, just being ridiculous. And he saw the deposition, and I'm sat in an office with him, and he's reading through it. And he stops, and he's silent, and he's seen the videos. Hell, I've made him see the videos repeatedly over the last few months. And he goes, have you ever thought of just letting this go and getting on with your life?
Well, yes, that was
it.
View that they will come to, because they live in a dream world and they don't care. But in conclusion, it carries on. If you are not satisfied with the response that you receive from the CPS, then you may wish to go through its complaint process. Now, its complaint process, like all of the other organisations there, will send you round in a circle back to the beginning again, and it's often 6 months later. And the CPS is an absolute joke. It's a joke in the respect that you couldn't make up the stuff that they come back to you with. It's like you've asked a question and then they respond by sending you a response which is in response to somebody else's question. It's got nothing to do with what you asked them. And it's incredible. I mean, in my case, they gave witness evidence in Crown Court and they told me I wasn't there. So that's how accurate the CPS are. And of course, all this is being pushed by the police to the CPS, and the legal profession is in league with it. So you've got to be very lucky and indeed very careful to get the right people on your side. So we're going to actually close the show there, and we're going to have a lot more on this in the months to come. We've got some great interviews coming up. We've got one with Sandy, who talked with us a while ago about Agenda 21, and we've got a really good follow-up to that. We've got Stephen Strong, who's talking to us from Australia about these 2 new skeletons which are found, which are totally anomalous to anything in their historical record of Homo sapiens sapiens, and indeed any other kind of mutation of that. And we've also got a great interview with somebody else about our subject today, crime farming. So all those are going to be appearing on YouTube, and we also got on Fab Radio on a Sunday as well. And we'll be back in 7 days' time at windowsontheworld.net. That's it from me. Thanks to James for coming on the show and Tony for producing, and we'll see you all next week.
The United Nations say CO2 is causing climate change. Windows says,
What a load of bovine excrement!